Kia ora, everyone. My name is Andrea, as some of you will know, and a very warm welcome to everyone who returned, but also, of course, to those who are new today. I'm very happy to be back. We had a 2 weeks break, and we have 4 more webinars lined up going into September. So watch this space. We are doing the webinars, since I think July now. And the reason why we have these webinars is that we couldn't do face-to-face seminars in Wellington due to COVID. We have these webinars are part of a series, as some of you will know by now, and it's called the Progressive Thinking series. And usually we publish a little booklet, which of course we couldn't do during lockdown. So we made all our chapters available on our website, and also all our webinars are available on our website, so you can check them out there and share them with your friends and family and colleagues if you enjoyed them, or of course a particular one. But we will publish a booklet on our current topic, the future of public and community services, later this year. And you can also find the previous publications of our booklets on tax, on housing, and on the future of work on our website. So it's worthwhile a quick visit. For those of you who haven't participated in the webinar so far, I'll do a quick run through how we do things here. I will just give you this run through, and then we'll do a quick introduction of our guest. And after that, our guest will present her chapter, or some thoughts that she would like to share. And then after that, we have plenty of time for a conversation, and also of course for your questions. So please use the question and answer function to post your questions. Try to keep them short and up to the point. It is much easier to build them into our conversation that way. And the questions that remain unanswered will be answered by Tracey afterwards. So as per usual, you will get answers to your questions if you post them in the question and answer session, either verbally here in this webinar, or later on a written response from Tracey. I think that's probably all I have to say in terms of housekeeping. Yes. So a very warm welcome to our guest today, Tracey Bridges. Hello, kia ora. Tracey has years of experience working in behavioral change and social marketing, and she's also a member of the organizing committee of the New Zealand Social Marketing Network, which, by the way, everyone can join to receive a communication and updates on everything that's going on in the social marketing space. So as always, Tracey and I had a little conversation earlier, and you told me your 3 words that describe you or your work, your motivation for your work. And these 3 words are progress, poetry, and purpose. And yeah, I would like to invite you to explain them and share with our audience why you chose those particular 3 words.
Thank you, Andrea, and hello, everybody. It's really hard choosing 3 good words. And I thought that I should choose 3 that have personal and professional resonance, and that in some way I can maybe weave back into the topic that we're talking about. And so as briefly as possible, purpose is a word, we hear a lot now, and it's one of those words that I think we hear a lot, not because it's a cliche, but for good reason, because purpose matters so much. So for me personally, it is who am I in this world, or as the sensei character said to Dr. Strange in that movie, who are you in this vast multiverse, Dr. Strange? And I love that question, and I love that thought process, and I think it's a one that we think about all through our lives. Professionally, purpose is about just having absolute clarity about what are we doing, who are we to be doing this project, how will we know if we've been successful, and just bringing absolute sharpness and focus to everything that we do, so that we don't waste resources or time or just accidentally blunder into territories that we shouldn't be in. So, and I will hopefully come to that when we talk about social marketing and behaviour change. Poetry, gosh, so I studied languages and literature at university. I love poetry. I recently discovered I spend way too much time on Twitter, and I broke a habit of a couple of years of looking at my phone when I wake up in the morning, and now I don't look at my phone. I pick up a poetry book from my bedside and I read a poem, a new poem that I haven't read before. Poetry, I think, fills us with inspiration and joy, but what it also does is it's, unlike most other things that we read or listen to, it's about meaning, not just information. And so, for me, it helps interpret the world and think about things. And of course, meaning, not just information, is also really important professionally. Progress, I am a progressive, but also just the concept of progress and change is so important in the world. I'm constantly trying to learn, I'm constantly trying to do things better. And I think change is so important for us all, but change is so hard, and such a struggle, particularly when we feel it's being forced on us. So again, really relevant professionally if we're trying to make people change, just to understand how hard that is for humans to embrace that change in their lives. So those are my 3 words.
That's great. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I think, as you already mentioned, a lot of that will come through when you're talking about your ideas that you presented in the chapter. I think it's very much interrelated. So you wrote about the state and social marketing, and you asked the question if we are able to embrace change. And I think specifically after the announcement of the Prime Minister yesterday that new cases have been identified in the community in Auckland, the importance of thinking about particularly the government's COVID communication package, if you like, is more topical than ever in how we can continue to communicate effectively and do what we need to do. So I'm very pleased to have you here today and this special day. I would just like to invite you to share some of your ideas that you presented in the chapter. As I mentioned earlier, you can find that on our website as well. So Tracey, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Yes, so my starting proposition for this chapter that I wrote was the question, can we change the way we think about change? And I'm really thinking about the public sector here. So I worked for maybe nearly 25 years in an advisory role to lots of different public sector organisations on behaviour change programs, what we call social marketing, the use of marketing and communication techniques to achieve social good behaviour change amongst populations and individuals. Every year the government spends tens of millions, maybe even more, on programs to try and change the way humans do things. And marketing and communications is a big part of the toolkit that government has for this. And we're all of us the target audience for those programs as well. And, COVID most noticeably recently, but campaigns to ask us to slow down, to drink less, to not smoke, to do our recycling, just almost every aspect of our life. There's a program from the government inviting us to be the perfect citizen. Communications and marketing can be a massively powerful tool to do this, but it can also, like any tool, be used badly. And I think in New Zealand we have some incredible practice, some genuinely world-leading practice, and we have some practitioners in this country who are who with good reason sit on the world stage. But we also have some practice that doesn't hit that mark, and when that happens, yes, obviously we waste money, precious public resources, but also there can be unintended consequences of that. It can unintentionally work against the goals we're trying to set by perhaps setting social norms that are exactly the social norms that we're trying to fight against, or perhaps increase inequalities when actually what we're trying to do is reduce inequalities, or re-stigmatise populations that we are actually trying not to stigmatise. So my question as a person sitting outside of the public sector now, as a former social marketer, and particularly prompted watching the COVID communications campaign unfold, is, can we do better, and what would it take to do better? What would it take to make sure that all of the programs, all of the spending that the government has on this excellent tool was well directed, and genuinely making a massive difference for New Zealand citizens. In the COVID case, which I watched and wasn't part of, but I watched it carefully, as I'm sure you all did, was a really great example of what we can do. And it was practically a casebook for great social marketing, great behaviour change communications. And there were lots of things about the circumstance that made it possibly weirdly easy, the urgency, the events unfolding around the world that made it unavoidable that something needed to happen. But there were also lots of things that will have made it incredibly difficult for those people working on it. And yet they overcame those difficulties through, I can only imagine a huge amount of hard work and incredible leadership. It won't have been perfect, I know that, but it was pretty darn good. One of the things that they did that I think paves the way for us to think about how we can do better in future is the collaboration across government. And it's a thing that we talk about a lot, and it's a thing that I know happens a lot, but it's also a thing that sometimes the nature of how the public sector work acts against. You've got to get things done, you've got to get things done quickly. Collaboration usually slows things down. How amazing that in the time leading up to COVID-19 they managed to collaborate quickly. Just a couple of thoughts about what was so successful about the COVID campaign. There's a lot you could say, but I just want to home in on 2 or 3 things, and then maybe some challenges in the next phase of COVID communications, given where we are today. Really importantly, a lesson that anyone involved in behaviour change programs can learn from the COVID campaign is focus on behaviour, and focus on a simple, clear, obvious behaviour. In this case, really early on, the message to New Zealanders was stay home. It's actionable, it's finite, it's easy to understand, and yes, you can argue on the fringes, if I don't stay home, what should I surf? But you're arguing on the fringes there. It's so much better than the UK one, which is stay alert, which is quite hard to interpret. I don't know how to be alert for a virus. I do know how to stay home. You can extrapolate from that to other programs. The number of programs I've worked on before that have identified attitudes or knowledge that they want from people and fallen short of choosing a specific action. And that's so important to do. It's hard to do, but it's important to do. And they did it in COVID, and I know we can do it again. And then the other thing I just want to draw attention to is the really extensive use of a massive range of different avenues for the communications, rather than relying on just one mechanism. So much communications is we'll just choose and put all of our eggs into one communication basket, maybe some ads on the television, for example. This campaign was everywhere, it was ubiquitous, and there's a great definition of good communications that I come back to a lot in my career, and it's good communications is simple, clear messages repeated often by a variety of trusted sources. And I think that's something they've got so right in this campaign that has helped us all so much to do the right thing and to find the right thing when we need it. There are some challenges ahead. So as we go back up the levels, I think that's going to be a lot harder than it was when we started at level 4, because level 4 was so absolute and it was so instantaneous and there was really no optionality. It was new, there was a sense of urgency. I think people have fatigue now. I think because it's so political, because we're in the middle of we're at the beginning of an election campaign, there's the convention that we had around constructive and supportive dialogue might be breaking, and that will allow the conspiracy theories and the fight against being told what to do to rise up and feel entitled and able in the way that we've seen in other countries. And I think those are all going to be fresh challenges for the people running the government COVID communications. It's crucial to unite and not divide, and that's what happens successfully in the first lot, and that's what's really at risk, particularly, again, as I say, since we're in the middle of an election process. That will be a massive challenge, and I think it's one we can all have a part in, actually. Andrea, have I got time for 3 thoughts on Dream for Future, or shall I pause?
Absolutely. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Right. Thank you. I asked the question, can we change the way the public sector approaches behaviour change? And, you know, it's a rhetorical question, and of course we can, but it won't be easy, because some of the things that would make behaviour change from the public sector so much more effective are so hard to do, particularly when you work in an environment where you are operating on, you know, 3-year cycles or even shorter funding cycles. But I'm just going to say what they are, and we can talk about what might make them hard, what might make them possible. The very first thing that would be most important for really successful behaviour change engagement from government in the future is doing more to take a community-centric approach, a whānau-centric approach, really engaging more deeply with communities well before we've even decided what our programs are, but really going in there and saying, we think this, what do you think, what do you see? And there are examples of this working so well. The Southern Initiative in Auckland in particular is a wonderful example of really starting to learn about the power of proper community engagement. The reason I'm so passionate about that comes back to that question of reducing inequalities. And what I see from social marketing practice over the past is that unintentionally, some of the practice does contribute to increasing inequalities through the almost paternalistic nature of the very construct. And if we can turn that around in the future, we're going to have a much better chance of genuinely creating to reducing inequalities in this country and creating bridges and uniting rather than dividing. The second thing I want to talk about is government collaboration, so cross-government collaboration. A lot of the communities that are maybe most affected by the behaviours that we need to change, the health problems, the social problems, the environmental problems, that they're receiving communications and engagement from a lot of different directions from government. And while each organisation might validly have a role to play, for example, ACC might validly have a role to play in alcohol moderation, there is another organisation in government that also is doing alcohol moderation. Are we doing enough to tie those pieces together? Are we doing enough to really create greater power, but also reduce the burden on communities by working collaboratively at a government level? And I think probably not, and I think everybody knows that, and it is really hard to do, but I'm sure and I'm confident that there's more that we can do. The last thing I just want to mention is, you know, there's a problem with the kind of the breaking of the mainstream media context, and that creates real challenges for communicating with people. You know, when we had just a few TV channels and just a few sources of information and just a few sources of news, we had an absolute orthodoxy, and it was really easy to control the message and really easy to control the discourse. With that breaking, it's a lot harder to reach people, but there's also a massive opportunity. And one of the things that we see, you know, although we see voices that sometimes disturb us through this kind of breaking of the orthodoxy, we're also seeing and hearing new voices that we never heard before, that are powerful in our community and so marvelous to hear. And so for social marketers and people in the public sector working on communications and marketing around behaviour change, the challenge and the question for us is, how can we find those positive voices and amplify them? So rather than always needing to be the voice from the centre or from the top, how do we lift up and amplify those community voices to really create much greater embedded community change and real movements for positive change in communities? Those are my thoughts.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing some of your thoughts. I have many questions. I might start at the end. You elaborated about the opportunities, which are, I guess, at the same time challenges as well, in terms of collaboration and engaging communities in a more meaningful and useful and frequent, I guess, way. And I'm just wondering how we make that happen under the constraints of time, maybe sometimes a lack of openness towards the input that you get from communities, the flexibility that is required when you're collaborating more. And, you know, those are, I think, very concrete hurdles that we need to overcome in order to do better social marketing programs, and actually better policy for that matter as well, right? It's relevant to that as well. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that? How can we deal with that? How can we break the speed of the world we are living in, I suppose?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. Those constraints that you've just outlined, you nail it, the constraints of time. The lack of openness, I think, is worth noting as well, because quite often, you know, if I think about the programs I've worked on, by the time it's come to me, 5 people up the train have already made a decision and already feel quite tied to that decision. So turning that kind of bus around can be pretty challenging. So that flexibility. So yeah, those are barriers. And sometimes the decision, we're going to do it this way and we're going to do it to this time frame, comes from really high up the chain. The main way to break that is leadership, and leadership from all of us, no matter where we are in that chain. So the main way to break it is intentionality. And it, you know, like all change, it won't be easy, and there will be forces fighting against it. And I guess the question is, how much do we believe in it? And do we believe in it enough to kind of feel the fear of being disruptive and kind of walking towards that? So the programs I've worked on where there has been real community engagement, there has been at least one person, but usually more, who have held a safe space for that. And it's hard, you know, because they're constantly working upstream in their organizations saying, no, we do need this time. And yes, we do need to ask these questions. And yes, we do need this process. But it can be done, and it does work. And the more it happens, the more it will be understood to be a thing that needs to happen, and the more that we will see the benefits of doing that. So I guess I would just say to people, decide if you mean it. And if you do, then, you know, walk towards the disagreements that will come from that.
I really like the idea of leading from where you are. I mean, that's, I guess, what we are trying to to do as a union, and that's a very empowering message, meaning that everyone can contribute from their specific place or perspective, knowledge or background. And
exactly right.
and I think then it becomes really relevant for people working in the public and community services as well, contributing to better social marketing programs, but also policy, if they, you know, really mean to collaborate, as you said, if they mean to engage the wider community in those developments and designs. So that's quite a powerful message, I think. Maybe we'll go back to the basics of meaningful and successful communication, because we are talking, or you have explained, the communication between government and citizens or residents residing in that specific country. But I guess at the very heart is really the basics of communication between, you know, you and I, or two people, like a speaker and somebody who receives a message. Do you think that is the basis for any social marketing campaign, and what are the basics for that kind of meaningful conversation to be successful in its messaging or exchange of messages?
Yep, thank you. Great question. I said at the start that social marketing, that kind of aspect of the discipline of behaviour change, is using, or at least if I didn't, I meant to, commercial marketing techniques to achieve a positive social outcome. And fundamental to commercial marketing is understanding your consumer. So consumer orientation, not product orientation or company orientation. And when you translate that into a public sector context, then that becomes citizen orientation. And so we ask ourselves, actually, what's going on with the people? So I think I want these people to stop smoking. Well, what's going on with them? And why are they smoking? And what role does that play in their lives? And what would stop them from stopping? And really deeply understanding all of that before you go anywhere near trying to talk to them. Because as we know, people don't smoke because they think it's good for them. So telling them it's bad for them, which is what we did for such a long time, isn't actually the way to go about it. So you're right, yes, there's a speaker and a listener, but more importantly than that, there's a human person doing a behaviour. And before you even start speaking, you need to find out about that. And sometimes you'll decide that's not the behaviour we need to change once you've investigated it. Sometimes you'll understand that there's a bigger or deeper problem, or actually there's a system that's in place that's making that behaviour for those people unchangeable. And then you need to orient yourself to the system before you can even think about addressing the behaviour. So I think that concept of citizen and consumer orientation, it's so hard, because when we work in organisations, we work there because we believe what they're about, and we believe in their mission, and we are a part of that story, and we imagine that if everybody else understood what we understood, then, you know, of course nobody would buy single-use plastic bottles, or, you know, whatever that thing is we want to change. But lives are complex and humans are complex, and we can't just kind of barrel up to them and tell them something and expect that they'll go, oh, thank goodness you told me that. Now I won't do that thing anymore that I've been doing for 30 years and I don't know any other way to do.
So it's really about applying an empathetic approach towards the people that you want to reach, rather than thinking about what you want to change in the first place, right?
Yeah.
To find out, and that's also why community engagement is so important, because that's where you get the background stories, if you like, for a certain behavior that you intend to change, and the information on what you need to tackle, actually, I guess.
That's right. And we can still be experts in our fields, but we have to remember that people are experts in their own lives, and we have to respect that and find out about that too.
It reminds me a little bit of the term nudging in economics. I guess we have heard a lot about that recently. It's kind of the maybe not a new kid on the block, but certainly a very popular one. And how do you think that, or is it related to social marketing programs? And in which way does it differ? I guess nudging deals with economic incentives rather than messaging, but tell us a bit about the difference maybe, because it seems similar on the surface.
They are similar. I'm glad you asked me about this. Behavioural economics, and it's not only economic nudges, it's also practical and environmental nudges. So, the great example is that's sort of detailed in Thaler and Sunstein's book, Nudge, is this idea, if you want kids in the school canteen to eat more salads, well, what they did was they went and watched the behaviour of the kids in the school canteen, and they discovered that the salad was at the end of the line. And so the kids had already filled their trays up, and so, no room for a salad. And the nudge was putting the salad at the beginning of the line, and what they found was automatically more kids were taking salads. And so that's an example of a nudge. When behavioural economics rose to prominence, I think it was maybe 10 years ago, social marketers kind of sat there and went, we've been saying this for years, but the behavioural economists did a lovely job of saying it, and they packaged it up beautifully. They did a good job of marketing it. But the central concept is you need to understand people, and I think for the economists it was fascinating. What an interesting central concept, that you might understand the people, not just the maths. So for them it was new. And there are some differences between the disciplines, but they're very overlapping disciplines.
Yeah, cool. I was also wondering about, so you already mentioned some of the main points that made the government's COVID response so successful. I'm quite curious how you go about, and you mentioned certain steps that you go through, but what are the say 3 or 5 main steps if you start from scratch and you have a problem that you identified? How do you design or develop that social marketing program? I guess I shouldn't say campaign. You will probably explain why. But it seems like an incredibly complex, process. So it would be really cool if you could share some of those main points with us.
I'll be glad to. It's, in a way, it's no different from any other strategic process. It's just that some of the choosing directions you'll take will be different. And so the first and most important step, as you've said, is identify the problem. What's the problem we're trying to solve? And then set some hypotheses, because if one of our hypotheses is that we think we need to change some people's behaviour to solve this problem or to contribute to solving this problem, what is that? What are those behaviours that we think need to change? So first of all, identify the problem, and second of all, form some hypotheses about what your goals might be around behaviours that you want to change. And the more specific you can be, the better. And to learn more about being really good and specific about behavioural goal setting, there's no one better than Doug Mackenzie-Moore, who's a Canadian social marketer, who's done a lot of work in thinking about that. So set a really good behavioural goal. And then you need to do some research. The 4 most beautiful words in social marketing, we did some research and really find out about the people. And this is where you might actually start working, not just doing market research, but actually start engaging communities and having some workshops or going into the community or inviting the community in, however, whatever your resource and your budget and your time frame will allow you to do, and the more the better. And I said before, form a hypothesis about the behaviour. That's because you're testing it, and the point about a hypothesis is you're prepared to change it. So once you've done that investigation, then you can reframe your hypothesis, or you can progress it if you were on the right track. Sometimes you'll go, oh, we're in the wrong room. And sometimes you'll be on the right track and you'll be able to frame it. And then, from there, it's just a case of understanding, as with any strategy, well, if these are my goals, what are the barriers that could stop me from succeeding? What are the opportunities that could help me succeed? What's the, and therefore what's the strategy that will be best? And you also have to think, of course, about who and prioritizing who. So the process itself is simple, and it's just like any other sort of logical logic progression or intervention logic or strategic process. But of course it's complex because it's humans, and you've got to be continually kind of looping back around and revising it. This phase of the COVID comms is going to be hard because they don't have time to research, and I think people are in a whole different place now than they were 6 months ago. And ideally it would be amazing to go out and do, well, they've got time to do some research, but not as much as you'd normally like. I hope that they can go and do that to kind of understand what those new barriers are.
Well, thank you. We actually have a great question about system change, because very often I think the problems or barriers are systemic ones, right? And not individual barriers or, barriers related to certain groups of people or, other specific aspects. Yeah. So do you think that social marketing could be used to change a system or take a systemic change as such? Yeah.
So sometimes a social marketing process is great for identifying that the problem isn't what you thought and that a system change is needed. So partly social marketing process can help you get sharper about that, because as you go through the process of deeply understanding your audience, you start to see those things in a way that perhaps you didn't see them before, because you can see them from the human or the user perspective. But maybe the other part of that question is, could you use the techniques of social marketing to influence within the system? And I would say again, yes, because what it's about is understanding what do they need and what are they about and what's stopping them from changing, and what can we put in place to help them change. So the thought process that sits within social marketing works, they call it in this practice, it works upstream and downstream.
Thank you. That's fantastic. We are just getting a few questions now, which is really exciting. Yeah. Maybe another one directly related to the government's COVID response and the tracing of potential cases. I have used or downloaded the app from the official app, but I've also noticed that there are other apps around that you can use. So I guess that is not quite clear for people, what kind of app they should use, and not every place, be it a shop or a cafe or the gym or anything else that you might visit, has the code to actually use your phone and track and trace where you've been. So what do you think about these details of implementation, these fine little difference between what is communicated and what is actually happening in practice? How can we improve on that? Because I think that is also quite relevant for the future, actually, going forward. The Prime Minister just stressed that this morning, that the tracing is really important. Yeah.
And it comes back to this question of marketing as well as communications. And I think very often in the public sector, we naturally use communication, sharing information. But marketing asks us to think about, what is the product, and is it good enough, and is it meeting people's needs, and where is the product placed, and have we got it placed where people can access it? So that product lens is really useful, and particularly when it comes to something like the COVID app. And in a perfect world, there'd be just one app that perfectly met people's needs and worked on all the phones, and then you'd have an amazing distribution distribution system so that there wasn't kind of a single entity in New Zealand that didn't have it. Whether or not the team that's working on the government comms will be able to achieve that will depend on what their other priorities are and kind of what their resources to do that. But the product's got to be great, or else people won't use it. And there's a famous saying from the 1970s, Procter and Gamble or someone like that. Basically, the best way to kill a bad product is good advertising.
Maybe a last question around, some of the constraints that we discussed, like time and openness, flexibility, but also cost, I suppose. Time is always a cost factor as well. And do you think engagement with communities or other groups does necessarily need to be costly? I think that is a really relevant question also from a union perspective, because we are all about participation, and very often we hear that, it actually the same things. It takes too much time, it costs too much, How does it always need to be that way?
So it definitely takes investment. I guess I immediately in my mind turned that word cost around and thought about it as investment. And, maybe I'm splitting hairs. Yes, it costs. And you've got to invest that time and money into it. And the other thing you have to think about is not only what is it, and I think maybe this is inherent in that question, the questioner might have intended it, not only is it costly for the public sector that's undertaking it and has to make the time for it and has to put the people into it and has to pay for the rooms and all those things, but it's really costly for the people participating. And quite often we're asking the same people to participate. So we need to think differently about that as well. And how are we compensating them for their investment in helping us have better processes? So I don't think there's any way of getting around the fact that this takes time and money. I guess it also saves time and money, right?
I guess it becomes less costly if you're focusing on a longer term time scale, right? It needs investment in the first place, but long term you are making a hell lot of savings actually, because you're doing the right thing, or you're doing something that will be successful, and that's where you actually are saving costs in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, measure twice, cut once, right? And I think way too often we don't measure and we just cut, and then we chuck it out and cut again. And, the number of programs I know that have run for a year or two, someone made an ad and they put it on TV, and then guess what? It didn't work, or it fell out of favour, and no behaviour was changed in the making of this product. And so, yes, we can look at it in terms of the cost, or we can understand the benefit, as you say, the long-term gain, and make that investment.
Fantastic. Do you have a few resources maybe to share for our audience that we already mentioned the social marketing network. I guess that would be a great point to start. Yep. But are there any other resources that you can recommend to?
Yes. So in the UK, there's an organisation called the National Social Marketing Centre, NSMC, and they have an amazing set of online resources. They have guides for, how to structure your program, what are the key things you need to think about. It's all really high quality stuff, really evidence-based, very good. Yes, the New Zealand Social Marketing Network, great to join, free to join, good to be part of the community and contribute to building professional development. The Australian Association of Social Marketing, and I sit on the board of that as well, They are running a series of webinars at the moment, which are hopefully going to be really useful. Phil Shearing, who's a New Zealand social marketer working at MPI, is doing a webinar, I think, in September. So we're working hard to get more kind of New Zealand, Australian cross-pollination, safe, non-COVID-y cross-pollination. What else? I mentioned Doug Mackenzie-Moore. He also has a really good website called Community-Based Social Marketing, CBSM. So if you Google that, that's worth a look as well.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe as a last question, because we are running out of time, but a very important one, is about evaluation. So how do we know if we were actually successful? And also, I guess, which lessons did we learn and how do we share them and how do we make sure that it doesn't happen next time? So what are your thoughts on that?
So yes, evaluation is so important and really hard to do in social marketing, because some of the behaviours that we're setting out to change are really long term. So it's just quickly, it's really important to think about, I sort of think about it as pebbles in a pond, and where your program is the pebble, what are all of the ripples out from that? So there are proximal measures and there are really distant measures. You know, the distant measure is, did the behaviour actually change in the long term and stay changed? But there are other things you can measure on the way out. And I think it's just really important to have sight across all of those possible measures. There's no way you're going to be able to afford to do all of them, but choose some and measure them. Did people show up at our event? Okay, that's interesting, but kind of not about behaviour change, but do measure it. That's the easy one. But what are the ones kind of in between that you can identify and set measures for? And the other point you make is learning. So important. We learn as we go. And there's a massive pile of evidence in this field that is often overlooked, because I think people think, oh, it's communications, I know how to do it. But actually there's a big evidence base that we can draw on and learn from when we're designing our programs and then evaluating them as well.
And again, that needs a little bit of intention, I suppose, to, you know, push for taking learnings on board. Yeah. I think we all have made those experiences in our respective workplaces that sometimes time, again, is used as well, maybe an excuse to avoid change or just do things quickly.
Well, we always run so fast, don't we? Yeah, and the big question for us all is, how do we slow the game down?
Yeah. Be intentional, I guess, would be your answer. So thank you so much. I think we came to an end time-wise, and thank you to all our participants and your questions. Those that we did manage to answer will get answered after the webinar. So thank you so much for attending. And our next webinar is next week, Wednesday again, on the 19th. And we will be talking to Thea Snow, and she's talking about reimagining governments. So that will be an interesting one as well, I'm sure. Thank you everyone for participating. Thank you, Tracey, for making yourself available and sharing your ideas.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And so I will just finish by saying thank you and stay well, everyone.